This congregation, High Country United Church, was founded years and years ago upon the ideas of being welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaging. It's part of the DNA of the congregation. And it's no less important to be a congregation that is fully welcoming and inclusive of persons who live daily with mental health challenges. Those questions are just as important as being open and affirming to persons regardless of their sexual orientation and gender identity, just as important as welcoming those who are experiencing racial injustice and working for justice and equity across racial lines, just as important as working for creation justice and environmental integrity in our world. These callings upon your congregation are essential, and this journey toward becoming a wise congregation is such significant work. And I salute you and I praise you, and I'm so thankful for your advocacy and for this important work that you are engaged in at this current time in your life. The scriptures are replete with stories of those who suffer from brain disorders of all kinds, and also who are suffering from the marginalizing effects of the communities around them who have rejected them and have been misunderstanding of their illnesses. Major characters appear in the Hebrew Bible, characters like Elijah and Saul and King Nebuchadnezzar and Jeremiah and others. One of the psalmists wrote, "I am in distress, and my eye wastes away from grief, my life filled with sorrow, my years with sighing. I am the scorn of my enemies, a horror to my neighbors, an object of dread to my acquaintances, and I hear the whispering of many voices. Terror is all around me." And of course, in the Gospels, Jesus encounters many persons whose communities respond to their behavior and their speech with superstition and fear, and stigmatize the sufferers as unclean sinners who are being punished by God and possessed by demons. In our story for today from Mark's Gospel, we have a variety of characters and experiences. We have the man who is suffering from mental illness, who is living in the place of the dead. He is naked. He is in restraints. He is crying night and day. He keeps on hurting himself. He lives in despair. You've seen this person or someone like him, someone maybe on the news, like the tragic story of Daniel Prude. Maybe the someone you've seen is very close to home. Maybe in your own family, maybe in the mirror, and maybe no one else knows. In Mark's story, there are also the people of the community and their fear and their revulsion. There are also the swine, likewise reviled and considered unclean, who in Mark's story become the symbol of the man's rejection by the community as they take on his illness. And then there's Jesus, who shows up in the graveyard and pays attention, valuing this individual, honoring his experience. He asks the man's name. He hears his story in his own words, the story of Legion, a word that means 6,000, the man with many, many voices. Jesus hears and sees this person with mental illness, and it takes courage both for Jesus and for the man to tell and to hear this painful story. A painful story that Legion has hurt himself repeatedly, and that the townspeople are frightened of him, even though the story does not say that Legion has ever hurt anyone else. You know, it's the same today. In our time, quite incredibly, The stigma is still teaching us that all persons with mental illness are violent and dangerous. But the truth is that, like Legion, statistically, persons with mental illness are much more likely to hurt themselves or to be victimized by others. In Mark's story, as Legion's illness remits, Jesus asks him to do a hard thing, to return to his own community and to dare to share his story. But sadly, if you read the story carefully, you see the stigma is still there. The people of the town are still afraid, and the realities are still realities that they have not yet understood. One day recently, a friend said to me, "You know, mental illness is the disease for which no one comes by your house and brings a casserole." It kind of hurt my feelings at first when he said it because, I would have brought a casserole. Any one of us in the faith community would definitely have reached out and offered support had we known. But that was, of course, precisely his point. Few people are told when either oneself or one's family members are experiencing a mental health crisis. Because often still, even in communities of faith, there is significant judgment attached to mental illness. And from the sufferers themselves even, there is an almost innate response of shame and fear. Brain disorders remain the only malady for which the sufferer is punished for being ill. Consider the fact that if a person suffers from asthma or arthritis, rarely is secrecy or stigma attached. In fact, it's quite the opposite. A certain nobility is presumed and a great deal of sympathy offered to those who courageously fight on even after they have had a recurrence of cancer or MS or kidney stones. But for people who live with depression or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or addictions, who also may be living in and out of remission, rarely is such encouragement offered to them. Many primary sufferers have acknowledged the truth that the stigma is at least as hard to live with as the disease itself. And so I've been thinking about that, thinking long and hard about the stigma originating in fear and maybe originating in an attempt to deny that any one of us may be vulnerable to mental health disorders, from mild to severe forms, in the same ways that we are also vulnerable to other disease processes. And that given the right set of biological, psychosocial, economic, or traumatic external circumstances, and our own mental stability, no matter who we are, may be catastrophically altered, as indeed it has been during these very hard days in which we are living. Any one of us may struggle with some sort of mental health challenge at some point in our lives. And in fact, we know statistically that in any given year, 1 in 4 of us do. If you look up the word stigma, the definition is as follows. Stigma is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person, as in the stigma of mental disorder. A mark of disgrace. That's not exactly a conducive environment for healing, is it? And though over time, circumstances have improved for primary sufferers and their families, multidisciplined interventions and strategies have changed and are more effective. The medications are better. The knowledge is more pervasive. Still, the walls are very high. The fear and the stigma very strong. Do you know what the plural of the word stigma is? It is stigmata. Stigmata. It stops you in your tracks if you consider that the word stigmata is a word used to refer to the wounds on the body of Christ when he was crucified. The marks of visible, visceral suffering. Appropriate enough to apply to those who are suffering from mental health challenges and their effects. So, High Country United Church, as you are in the process of considering becoming a wise congregation, it means that you're promising to increase your understanding by learning all you can in the challenging tangle of medical and political and legal and societal realities in order to create in your church a safe and equitable environment, a safe space for all people, regardless of anyone's mental health status at any given moment. To join with physicians and pharmacists and chaplains and nurses and legislators and social workers, psychotherapists, peer-trained specialists, law enforcement officers who are taking crisis intervention training, advocacy organizations, researchers, crisis center personnel, teachers, family members, mental illness survivors themselves, and many, many others who live and work courageously and relentlessly in the middle of a broken and often terrifying mental health system. Becoming welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaging will always involve becoming. For what we learn about brain disorders and about their correlation to poverty and trauma and violence, and how any one of us may show up for each other in solidarity, all of that is always evolving. Becoming wise means that over time we will join hands with one another, partners in advocacy and support and empowerment and in recognition of gifts and graces and in the provision of a community of love and welcome and belonging and leadership and strength, no matter one's level of health at any given moment. It means refusing the stigmata through knowledge and determined compassion, both for others and for ourselves when we do and when we don't get it right. It seems to me that when we engage ourselves in this important, courageous work, that it's an opportunity for blessing. To take down the walls of stigmata brick by brick and with intentionality to provide an open, spacious asylum for one another. Do you know that the original meaning of the word asylum was safe house? Safe house. And in its earliest days, safe houses, those institutions, were founded by social justice advocates like Dorothea Dix. And those safe houses were meant to serve as places of care and protection for those who were most vulnerable. And churches, too, through the centuries, have been called upon to offer asylum, spiritual, mental, and physical sanctuary for all people. All. Kathleen Greider wrote, "Many spiritual teachings suggest that sanctuary is an attribute of holiness. The cultivation of a nonviolent human spirit makes sanctuary for the heart and soul possible. To offer asylum and acceptance for and with each one of us, dear friends, is part of our spiritual vocation. It's nothing less than that, a spiritual vocation." There are truthfully no guarantees, though. There are no guarantees of safety. There are no guarantees of a control of good, positive outcomes for any one of us in this world in any given day. But on the other hand, each day presents a new opportunity for us to recommit ourselves and our families of faith to our promise to be wise, safe houses where all our siblings will find in us compassionate, informed, and loving friends. It's a spiritual mandate for us to create within our communities something very important, and that is the capacity for health. The capacity for health, mental, physical, and spiritual. May it be that we will open our hearts even more to the creativity, the worthiness, and the light that stir within each one of our lives. May we embrace the hope and the remarkable opportunities that we all share to find our way to solidarity, resiliency, and real relationships, to rediscover the sacred tie that binds us all in love. May it be so in and through you. May it be so today. Amen.